scene. All right, so this is what we accomplished last class, right? Gorgeous. All right, so what was our first step in building anything in After Effects? Make a new composition, right? So we have to have a clean slate, something to go with. All right, so you don't have to follow along with this point. I'm just going to do it just so we can see what happens, okay? Remember, we do 960 by 540. You have your little cheat sheet card, so you can always look at that and see what your resolution is. 30 frames per second, again, cheat sheet card. The start time code for, pretty sure all of our assignments are 0. The duration is going to vary. So for these things, because they happen so quickly, typically 3 seconds is a good amount of time, you can add time to this, you can take time away. So if you accidentally put in 50 seconds or 3 hours, you can go back and change your settings, okay? Also, there's a background color. I think I kind of skipped over that last time. The background color is simply there so that you have something underneath it. When we get into doing what are called nested compositions, the background color for one composition doesn't translate into another composition, okay? So just mental note, make sure you're aware of that for later. There are also some tabs up here. It's hard to see that these are tabs, but we'll get into that stuff a little bit later. All right, so now we have a blank composition. So then what do we do? Yep, we need a new solid, so we go to Layer, New Solid. Again, we can pick our settings, pixels, square pixels, change the color. Again, all this stuff can be changed afterwards, so it's not incredibly imperative that we do it perfect right now. And then always give your stuff a name. Base layer. Okay. So now we have a base layer. Now we have to decide, what do we want to animate? Every page transition is going to have a different way that you're going to animate it. So hopefully over the weekend you looked at some stuff on YouTube to see different kinds of animations and different things. Yes? No? Yes. Okay. So looking at some of those, you'll kind of get an idea of how some of those are created. So in the one that we did before, what property did we animate? We did do a scale one and we did do a position one. This one here, that was all position. Okay? All we did was take that one solid and just animate its position moving down. That's all we did. So let's see what we can do for another one. So let's say rotation was one that we did, right? We did do rotation. So I'm going to rotate it. Now anytime I rotate, what thing do I have to adjust? Anchor point. Someone said anchor point, right? And the size, that's correct. So I'm going to move the anchor point, so I hit Y. That brings me to this tool. I move this to the corner of where I want to rotate from, okay? So think about visually how you want this thing to move. If I wanted it to slide in like this, you see where my anchor point is right here on the bottom, right? If I wanted it to come in like this, that's a different anchor point. If I wanted to come in like this, that's a different anchor point, okay? So all the anchor point does is say where it's like pivoting from, where is that little hinge. So in this case, just to make it different, I'm going to put it over here. Typically I don't. Typically I stick to the left side, but I'll throw it on the right side. All right, and then rotation, right? All right, so when I set keyframes, how many times do I have to click the stopwatch? Once, right? We just say I'm setting keyframes on this property, and it's good to go. So I'm at 0. I set keyframe for 0, and then I can, move my ticker up or whatever. Now these keyframes can also be moved. So once I click it here, I can actually move this. Okay, now before, what we did is we would advance to like 1 second and we would turn the stopwatch on and then we would come back to the beginning. Okay, that was introduction. Now we can just start setting keyframes and moving them around. It doesn't matter where we're at. So I'm at the beginning, I set my first keyframe, I shoved it down to 1 second, and now I'm going to set my 1 to get it out of there. So I'm just going to rotate it up. And then now we have this. Okay, now that actually doesn't look too bad. I don't think I really need any scale on this, but Let's do some anyway. So I hit S for scale, make it huge, go back to my rotate. Yeah, that definitely looks better than it did a second ago. Now it looks more like a wipe from the corner as opposed to just a piece falling down. Okay, so I have some keyframes here. I have, if I hit play, I'll see the animation. So can I start duplicating this now? No. I still need to do what? Easy ease, right? F9, or we can right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. Again, pay attention to the shape of those. They're not diamonds. They're not dots. They're two triangles, I guess. However they want to say it. Yeah, hourglass, that's even better. That's a better example, an hourglass. So we have the hourglass, and that means that we have easy ease keyframes, which we have something. Okay. So is it done yet? Can I start duplicating? Nope. What do I got to do still? Change the speed. So I'm going to take the graph editor here. I'm going to click on my rotation. Make sure that I've right-clicked and chosen to do a speed graph. Your default every single time you come into this class will be value graph. After Effects defaults to value graph, so you have to make sure you change it to speed graph. Works completely different. Okay. And then I click on this, and then I'm debating whether I want it to go fast at the beginning, fast in the middle, or fast at the end. Right now, what is it doing? Fast in the middle, right? You look at the graph. That's where it's the most speed, is right there. So that's where it's going to be going the fastest. So if I want this to go faster at the, we'll just try one and see. I think faster at the end might look cool. I pull both of these handles over. They can move up and down, so just be aware of that. This handle does move, but typically you want to keep it right in that line. Go back. Okay. Now it's definitely faster at the end, right? But it's not as fast as I would like it to be. So how can I make that even faster? Squish it, right? I have these two keyframes. Instead of them being 1 second apart, let's pull it in so that they're maybe 10 frames or 12 frames apart. So I'm going to actually go to 10 frames. Anytime we animate, typically you want to go further than you think and then start to back off. If you start incrementing, like I'm going to try it at 29, 28, 27, 26 frames, you're never going to get there, okay? You want to really go extreme and then say, okay, now I need to start backing off. So just to see, I think 10 is probably going to be good, but I'll show you what 5 looks like and how we can back off. Okay, that's actually like perfect of how we want that to be. But just again, let's put it at 5, which is about here. It might have been way too quick. Yep, I can't really even see what's happening. Let's go here. There you go. And actually, I think I do like it at around 7. Or 8. It's actually at 8 seconds. Or 8 frames. Perfect. Okay. So now we have it at 8 frames. That looks pretty decent. Now can I duplicate? Yes. Okay. So how do we duplicate? What's a hotkey? Control D. 1, 2. And how many should we have? 5, right? Odd numbers work perfect for this kind of situation. I don't know why they do, they just do. All right. So I've duplicated them all. I need to offset them so I can just scoot them up a couple frames. Now, me scooting this up a couple frames, that's how I'm doing it. That doesn't mean that you have to do it that way every single time, okay? You could offset the first one like 4 frames, then the next one 3 frames, then the next one 2 frames, then the next one 1 frame. That way you have kind of like a easy ease of this entire animation too. So it actually animates a bit different. All right, so I'm going to change the color too, right? Control Shift Y. Go to the next one, change color. Whoops. Control Shift Y. There we go. All right, now I hit play, and it works. Okay, not the best color choice. Okay, 5 random colors doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anytime we do something like this, be aware of what color combinations you're picking. Usually in this kind of situation, you have an animation, you have another animation you want to get from one to the other. So typically what I'll do is try to find, like let's say I'm going from yellow to blue, I'll try to find a nice way to transition from this yellow color to that blue color by changing my colors in there. I wouldn't throw like a red in there. That wouldn't make sense, okay? So anytime you pick colors, like I said before, the best thing to do is using this HSB. You can just slide this up and down to change different values of brightness, or just change one of these. If you click on any one of these values here, it'll actually isolate just that one value. So now I'm just changing the hue, or I'm just changing the saturation, or I'm just changing the brightness. I would say changing 2 of these is fine, but try not to change all 3 too drastically, because otherwise you'll get into this ugliness that I have down there. Yes, ma'am. Right, you can use the color themes also. In After Effects, I typically don't use those. I usually use them in Illustrator and then bring them in just because that's my workflow. But there is, under Extensions, Adobe Color Themes. And these are actually like themes that people have created. Basically like these 5 colors I like together, or these 6 colors, whatever they do. Those are still user-based. So again, try to pick ones that do look pleasant together. Just because somebody posted online doesn't mean that it's actually like a good color scheme. So just be aware of that, okay? All right, so that looks pretty decent. Anything else I could do to this? Change the what? I could change a pivoting point, but I wouldn't want to do that now, okay? Once I have this set up like this, I don't want to start changing the pivot point. If I realize I don't like where that's at and I want to move it to a different corner, I would delete all of this stuff, go back to that original one, move the pivot, move my animation, and then tweak it. Somebody did say it, though, the next thing I want to do. Motion blur, right? So 2 steps to motion blur. We have to turn it on the layers themselves and turn it on the composition. And you'll see that effect. You can see the blurriness here. Now this is going to look really ugly because I've chosen colors that don't necessarily blend nice together. Okay, and I did that purposefully so that you could see that doesn't look very nice. If I went from a dark green to a light green, or a medium to a dark color, that is going to blend a lot nicer, right? It still works. It could have a certain effect to it if you needed to, if you're trying to get something a little bit more flashy. Okay. Now here's what I was saying before about offsetting. If I take this one and I offset it, let's say 3 frames, and then this one goes 2 frames, that one's 1 frame, and then that one's 1 frame. I'm also going to set my work area to right there. Okay, so it's a subtle thing. I'm seeing more of that green, more of that purple, and less of the last 2 swatches there. You can see that these 2 red and green ones here, I barely see any of, because they're only a 1 frame offset. The other ones are 2 frame offset and 3 frame offset. The bigger the offset here, the more you're going to see of each one of those layers. And just to, again, exaggerate it so you can see it more, if I were to take all of these and stretch this out, and stretch that out, and stretch it out, and pull that out, this is like the world's slowest page transition. Again, there are spots where you may have a need for something like this, where you need it to be more drastic. Not in this case. Okay? Usually for something like this to work, you have to have a nice piece of music in the background that has like that beat where you're hitting it every single time one of these colors come down. That's where that could work really well. Okay? But for what we're doing, we're keeping it pretty simple. Okay? So how long is this page transition actually? It's 1 second, right? So if we look at our timeline, there's 1 second right there, and it's already done. So I like to leave myself 3 seconds of space because I may need 3 seconds of space. I don't know. So I want to make sure that I have that room, figure out where my end is, and then what I can do is cut it off. Okay? So what I'm going to do is go to where the end of this happens. So it happens, let's say, about here. That's at actually about 17 frames. Okay? And then I'm going to go a little bit further. So I'm just going to basically round this off to about 1 second. And I'm going to go up to my composition, and I'm going to say trim comp to work area. And what that's going to do, it's going to take this work area right here, and it's going to resize my entire composition so it fits just in that little area. Okay? Trim comp to work area. Boom. Perfect. So now I hit play, and there it is. Perfect. Now the reason that we're doing that is because eventually we're going to be stacking our page transitions on top of each other. So we need to have a little bit of a buffer afterwards. So if mine was 17 frames, roughly double that. Okay, I just rounded it off to 1 second. That should be plenty of room. If I come back later and I need a little bit more time, I can come back and get it. So ideally, all of yours will be around that same time frame. You may have some that are more complex. Maybe they take 18 frames or 20 frames or 23 frames, but they shouldn't be like 4 seconds long for a page transition. Okay? It's something just quick in and out. Yes, ma'am. I'll look at it in a second. Correct. This would be one page transition. Okay? Now this is just using rotate. Today I'm going to go over some extra stuff that we'll be doing, just animating different properties. Next class we'll be getting into using other ways to create page transitions too. I want to see a mix of these things. Okay? So these ones are our baby ones. These are the ones before we can walk, how we're just doing these like little simple things. The more advanced ones, we want to add stuff in there. So single property ones like this, you could do one of these in your final 5. Okay? By the time you're done with these, you'll have ones that are animating multiple properties at the same time, a little more fancier than just like this kind of boring one. And then you'll have stuff where we're animating shape layers too to create some really cool page transitions. All right? So I want to see a mix of those, not just I animated rotate, and then I did scale, and then I did position, and then I did scale again from a different corner, and then I did rotation from a different corner. That's kind of boring. All right? Cool. All right, so let's get into it. So if you don't have your computers up, get your computer up. If you don't have After Effects up, get After Effects up. And then open up your composition, or open up your file. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create another one. So you've seen rotation, you've seen position. No surprise, scale is going to be pretty much the exact same thing. You can scale stuff up, scale stuff down. So what I want to do is I want to create one that does 2 things, right? So it'll scale and rotate it and rotate inside the same composition. So it's a little bit more advanced animation. We have to think about how we want this thing to happen. I'm just going to create a window here. There's my composition, let's say. And so what do I want to happen? So I want this to happen. So there's nothing on the screen here. So there's frame 1. That's an easy one to draw. Copy that down. And then frame 2, I want that there. And I'll even give this a color so that looks nice and pretty. Or obvious. There we go. So it's going to go from this here to that. Now how it gets from one to the other, I need to figure that out. So I could have a solid right in the center, and it just scales up just a hair. Okay? Or I could have a solid off the screen, and then it scales out like this. Or I could have a solid scaled in the middle, and then it comes out like that. Okay? I could do a trillion different things. So let me just create a middle ground here. This is the point of this, is that you kind of get the idea of what you want to do. Eventually you'll get to the point where it's like, I'm just going to do it in After Effects and see what it looks like. But for now, just to kind of figure out what we're trying to do. So with this one, I'm going to go like this. And what that means is that it's going to go from this to that to this. Okay? And then what we're going to do, I'm going to scale these down or move them because I need more room. Okay. And then from here, I'm going to take this and just rotate it. And then from here, I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. Ignore the stroke on there. And then I'll take this and make that bigger. Okay, so now we can see the kind of animation that we're going to be dealing with. We start off with nothing. It's basically a flat solid in the center that's just going to scale out horizontally. Then it's going to rotate, and then it's going to scale out the rest of the way that way. Okay, so we're dealing with two separate scales. So we're not doing an overall scale or proportionate scale. We're dealing with specific, just a couple scale items. Now for this animation, where's the pivot point going to be? Right, it's going to be in the middle. Okay, everything's coming off of the middle, so we don't have to worry about anything else. If this bar right here was going to be scaling from the left side and coming across, my pivot point would be on that left side. Okay, but then I would have to say, okay, well, if it does come off the left side, how am I going to then rotate it? Right, because I'm dealing with two things. That gets in, more involved in some more advanced stuff. Okay, so for now, keeping it simple. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So pivot point's at the center. It's going to scale up, it's going to rotate, and it's going to scale out. Okay, no big deal. We have a plan. All right, so now let's go to our composition and make a new composition. And we will call this scale, rotate, bar, page transition. (960 by 540) square pixels, 30 frame rate, duration is 300, and a black background works. Make sure you check all of these settings, especially your first project of the day. When the system reboots, they go back to default settings, so they may have some random things in there that are not what you expect. Okay, and then all of these should also be on your cheat sheet too. So if you don't have my screen up here, you can always refer back to that too. Everyone good? 960, 540, square pixels, 30, full, 0, 3. Cool. So hit OK when you're done. All right, how do we get a new solid on the screen? Control Y. Pick a color. Again, don't spend an hour doing it. Just grab something and hit OK. And then make sure you rename this base layer. Base layer is always the first one I animate. That way I know if I come back in 3 weeks or 6 months, that base layer was the first one I did. Doesn't really matter in this case, but just for this kind of purpose. So what do we need to adjust first? We can refer back to our illustration. We need to get this shape right here first. Okay, we're going to animate it kind of backwards. So we're going to get to this shape first, and then we'll shrink it in till it's gone. Okay. So if we look at this, I'm going to hit V to get back to my regular arrow. If we look at this and I were to click and drag, you can see that it pulls down right from the center here, which is perfect. Now what's going to happen when I rotate this? What are the ends going to do? Are they going to be like nice and off the screen, or are they going to be cutting halfway through it? Like, are they going to be like, I'll just do it so you can see. Are they going to do that? See how ugly that is? So we want to stretch those out. I find it very difficult to use these manipulators. This manipulator here and these ones on the side, especially when we get into these areas where it's like super thin. So what I think is more helpful is to just hit the S key and use the sliders at the bottom. Okay? Now if I try to slide either one of these right now, it's going to slide both because I have the little chain link set up. Remember the chain link in Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign constrains the proportions, right? So I'm going to hit the chain link off. And then I want to scale this down this way. Which one am I going to touch? The second one. Why the second one? Yep, that's Y, right? So that's going to control our height. So we're going to click and drag the second one to scale it down to an appropriate height. Now, appropriate height is something different for me and you. I like to have it kind of like on the thinner side than the thicker side. Yes, ma'am. I have the most control when I do this compared to those things because of just how After Effects works. All right, so we've scaled it down in the Y direction. Now what do we need to do? Scale it up in the X direction, right? All right. Now, before we do that, though, notice that we're going to be scaling it down in the X direction, right? We're going to be animating it, so we don't really need to scale it up in the X yet. We just need to know that when we do scale it up in X, that we scale it up further than the composition, so further than 100%, okay? So just take your X and put it at 0. Okay, so right now my two scale values are 0% and 1%. Okay, so this first number is 0, the second number is 1. Now when we did that, do you see how there's nothing on my screen? It's not there, but it is there, okay? All right, so now we're gonna set a keyframe for scale. So we click on the little stopwatch. And then how far up should we go? How many frames up should we go? What was that? 1 second? Okay. As a beginner animator, don't worry about necessarily, I don't know, I'm going to spend too much time thinking about it. Set some keyframes. Then after it's done, move stuff around. Okay? It's 10 times easier to move stuff around than try to guess. Once you've done this for 2 months, you'll get a better feel for how long things are going to take. Okay, so yeah, let's go to a second. And now we're going to take that X up really far. You can go like crazy far, not like too crazy. That should be good. So I went to 150. I think 150 is probably a long enough length of time. Okay, so at 1 second, I just changed my X to 150. All right, so that's what we have so far. So now we need to rotate it, okay? So our first one is we scaled it. Bloop, the scale went up. Now we need to rotate it. So right at this point, we want to start rotating. So we have to say, at this point is when we're going to start rotating. So we hit R to get to rotate, okay? Make sure you go right to the end of that animation, okay? If you're not sure, you can hit S and make sure that your ticker is right on this keyframe. And if you had your hotkey sheet out, you'll see that J and K are your ways to quickly move between hotkeys. Okay, K will move you to the next hotkey, J will move you to the previous one. And again, After Effects did a sweet job of those two hotkeys are right next to each other. Cool. So we hit R. We turn our stopwatch on for rotate. We're not rotating anything at this frame. We're just turning it on to rotate, to start rotating here. Then we're going to go up to 2 seconds. We'll just do another 2 seconds. And then we'll rotate it. And again, you could try using the rotate tool. There's one up here, right there. But it's actually a bit easier just to type in 90. Because we know we want it at 90. Okay. Remember that we have two values. We have one that is this first number, that's revolutions. We don't want that at 90. That would go crazy fast. We want the second number to be the 90. Okay, so it should say 0x90 for your 2 seconds. And then when you rewind it and play it, you should get this. Bloop, bloop. Cool. Okay, so we have it come out, it rotates. So now we need it to scale again. Okay, so now you walk me through this. So where does my time slider need to be, or my ticker need to be for my next keyframe? 2 seconds. So what's the hotkey to get back there real quick? J or K, yep. All right, so where do I set my next keyframe? Right there? Yep. So we haven't talked about this yet. If we want to set a keyframe at the current value. So right now I don't want to adjust my scale at all, okay? I need to set a start point and an end point. So I need to start my scales animation right here, and I want to end it with it stretched out. So basically I need to say, right where you're at scale, I need to set a keyframe. You click this little diamond on the far left. Okay, and all that does is it just takes that keyframe and it copies it and puts, or it doesn't copy it, just figures out whatever value it is and puts a keyframe there. Okay, then we go up to 3 seconds and scale it up. All right, so now that looks pretty horrible, right? Beginning animators, we don't really know timing things, so we have to adjust our timing, okay? We could easy ease this and then jump in the graph editor, but I already know that that's not going to fix the major issue, which is how far apart each one of these keyframes is, okay? So I need to adjust all of my keyframes. Now to do that, right now I'm only seeing scale. If I hit R, I'm only seeing rotate. Does anyone remember the hotkey to show all of our keyframes? U. So if we hit U, then we will see all the keyframes, okay? Now here's what's cool about this is that we can marquee. If you've never heard the term marquee before, you're not alone. I get the question all the time. Marqueeing is you're drawing a box, okay? So watch how I can draw a box. I click in this blank space, and then I can drag this box to highlight stuff, all right? So what I want to do is I typically will attack this keyframes at a time, okay? So these two keyframes are lined up. I want to grab those two keyframes first and nudge them over, okay? So I'm just going to grab these and pull this over. And I'm going to go pretty far. I'm going to go to like there. Then I'm going to grab the next two, pull them over there. Then grab the next one, because there's only one there, and drag him over there. Okay, and then I'll adjust it. I'll move things around and I'll see what works. There's a little bit more room here. There you go. That feels better. Okay, so let me stop my animation. So if we look at the speed of any one of these properties, it's being a consistent speed, okay? So imagine you're driving in the car, and instead of accelerating to 60 miles an hour, you just go 60 miles an hour right away. And then when you stop, you just stop. That's what's happening right here. These are moving from point A to point B at one constant speed. It's very unnatural. Typically, like, robots would do that, but people don't, and motion graphics don't. So when we do easy ease, what it does is it says, okay, at the beginning of this, I want a slower animation. At the end of this, I want a slower animation. And because these two are slower, the middle will then be fast. So now it's actually like more like an actual car. You gradually pick up speed, you hit one speed, and then you gradually slow down. Okay? So it makes it feel more natural. And in some cases, you'll find that the graph editor really isn't necessary. Too much, at least. So if we look at this right here, and I go back to, this. There we go. If we go back to this, you can see here's their speed. Straight there, straight there, straight there. That's what they're currently doing before easy ease. When I put easy ease back on this, and I frame this, why aren't you framing? Oops. There it is. So when I put easy ease on this, now you can see there's more of a transition where it's softening those ends. So I go back to my speed graph. And now I grab these. You'll also notice too that the speed graph is actually color coded now. because we have different properties, it's showing us red is my scale X, green is my scale Y, and blue is my rotation. I'll be right over there in a second. And it's going to be definitely difficult to select stuff in here, just because there's so many different graphs. You can click on one property, like just rotation, and isolate that. You can click on just scale and isolate those. At some point, you may tweak a curve and it doesn't do anything. It's just because it's the other curve underneath it that we have to tweak, okay? All right, so you can tweak these a little bit further too later. So now the next step in this would be what? Save it. That's a good idea. It's saved in a while. Duplicating it, right? So we can still duplicate an effect like this, even though it does cover the screen. Now, when you're doing your demo reel or you're putting together an animation, usually something like this is a one-off. We just do like one little thing, bloop, and there it is, and we change our color, okay? But for the sake of this assignment, just to get into the habit of doing this, we want to duplicate this, okay? So what that's going to do is it's going to create this really cool effect where we actually have like 5 sticks coming out and turning and then scaling. It looks really neat. So do the same thing, duplicate it 4 times so you have 5 copies. Change your colors. All right, you may find on these, once you turn motion blur on, that it does this. Okay, so on mine, it's doing that. I think that actually might be a 2017, whatever version specifically this is, that's doing it. Last year, it did not do it at this point. So at some point, we may just have to say, okay, well, I'm going to just kind of look at what the motion blur would look like. Yes, that probably looks good, and then I could turn it off. There's other stuff that we could set. Where's that button at? Right there. Nope, that one didn't do it. There's another one right here where you can sometimes set this off, and sometimes that will work. Apparently not here. We could also lower the resolution sampling and see if that works. That doesn't seem to work either. Yeah, so we may have to just turn this off while we're previewing it, and then at render time, turn it on, okay? And it'll know at render time to turn that on. There may be something else too. This is like a new thing I'm just finding out that they're doing. Appearance, video project. else there. Okay. So I'll look into that just to see if there is maybe a fix. It could just be an After Effects bug. It could just be being stupid. Oops. Okay. So once we get this to a point where we like the animation that's happening, and I think the animation I have here is good, remember I'm going to go a little bit further than I think I need. Okay? You don't have to go all the way to the end, but I want to go a little bit further with my work area and then do that composition trim comp. Okay? That way I'm locked into just that area that is appropriate for what I need. Okay? Now let me show you a couple more. Okay, we're not going to walk through these because it's going to be, oh, I went to new project, I want to do that. It's going to be basically the same thing, just applying in a different way. Okay, so the same thing we did for just the basic position or scale or rotate or this fancier one, it's going to be the same thing for every other one you're going to do. So this one I'm going to go diagonal scale. Okay. Again, you don't have to follow along with this one. It's better taking notes or just kind of observing to see how I'm doing it. I'm going to make a new solid. I'll make it visible so you can see it. There's a wonderful color right there. And this one I'm going to come in diagonally from the side. Okay, from this top corner here. So I'm going to rotate it like that. I'm going to scale it. And this is me kind of like setting it up like what I want it to look like. Okay, so I'm going here. I'm making sure that it fits. I may need to adjust the angle. Okay, so if my angle is off, I need to set that up now so that it looks appropriate. That looks good. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my manipulator here and just move this over. Okay, so I just move that anchor point right there. Now I'm going to go back to my scale. I'm going to reset my scale here to 0. I'm going to set the other one to maybe, I don't know, 16 I think would probably be a little bit better. The more of these that I have, or sorry, the thicker this is, the more of those, or the less of those I need, right? Because if it's thicker, I need less bars to cover it. If it's thinner, I need a whole lot of bars to cover that thing. So I'm just cutting down my workload. Perfect. So I'm going to hit scale here. I'm going to go up to about there. Pull this up a lot. Like that. Perfect. And then I'm going to go to Easy Ease. Go to here. Go to here. Make this fast at the end. Cool. And then I'm going to duplicate it. Now this one, because of the kind that it is, I don't actually know. It's not going to be 5, I'll tell you that. It's going to be maybe 7 or 9. Okay? So I'll start off with 7. I'm going to pull it out so I can see the whole thing. I'm going to go to the next one on the list and just scoot it over. I'm going to go to the next one on the list and scoot it over the other way. I'm going to go to the next one on the list, scoot this one over that way. Go to the next one on the list, scoot it over this way. And this is just manually moving it. Now, because I'm just animating scale, I can rotate, I can move without affecting anything else. Yes, ma'am. You could, but it's not really necessary. Not with these ones specifically, but with shape layers, I could turn on just their outline and just see the outline. Okay, you could zoom in and really get close and hit that. Most of the time, it's not really going to be necessary. You can have a little bit of overlap, and nobody's going to kill you. Hopefully. It escalated quickly. Okay, now I'm going to go back to this one, and I'll just duplicate a couple more. Boom, boom, boom. So I duplicated 3 more. So there's 4, which is the one I just laid down. I have 3, so I'll put that one here. I have 2, which I will put here. And 1, which I will put there. And you'll see that I still need maybe 1.5 more. Alright, so there's one. That side. That side. Okay, so that looks like that's pretty good. So now if I rewind, I get this wipe. Just move up just a hair. And I'll even duplicate that and just create an extra one just to cover that little spot. Okay. Alright, so now we have that little wiping. Then I can go back and adjust each one of those properties so that I would have different colors on each one. So it wasn't just this one big band, because that looks kind of ugly. I could have just done one big wipe like that. That doesn't make sense to have all these bars. So just to see a couple of these, I'm not going to do all of them just because that'll take a little bit longer than I want to show. And again, I'm picking these crazy colors just so you can see it better of where they're at. Yes, it is. Alright, so pretend that I've done it to all of those. Okay. Alright. And then I can still go through and offset each one of these. Now, this is a quick way to offset. So far, we've done pretty much the same offsets, right? 2 frames, 2 frames, 2 frames. That's not a big deal. After Effects actually has a tool inside of it that will automatically offset stuff for you. It's just a matter of clicking some buttons, punching in a value, and there you go. So if I go here and I grab all of these, in the order I want them to offset, I go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, there's something called Sequence Layers. Okay, Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And what this will do is, by default, it'll just stack them. So if I had a bunch of layers that are like 10 frames long, it'll put this one, and then it'll put that one, then it'll put this one, then it'll put that one, and then this one. Okay, so if I just want to do a bunch of cuts, I can do that. I actually want to have them overlap, right? Because that's what they're doing in each one. They're overlapping on there. Our time is 3 seconds long, right? So I have 3 seconds. So I want them to overlap for 2 seconds and 28 frames. That's 2 frames minus 3 seconds, okay? So 2 seconds, 28 frames. There it is. Super quick. Now, I chose this one first. I shift-clicked that one on the bottom last. And so you can see the way the stairway goes, right? It's going down. If I click the bottom one first and then the top one last, then it would go that way. For this animation, it doesn't matter because they're not stacked on top of each other, right? They're all just basically next to each other, so it doesn't matter. The last one we did, this scale rotation bar, if I had my stairway going the other way, I would never see any of the other ones. I would only see the first one because all the other ones are underneath that animation. Okay? Just like layers work in Photoshop or Illustrator. Alright, so now, there we go. Now it does matter as far as the order that this is going. So you'll see now it's coming from the outside and going in. If I wanted to go from the inside out, I hit undo. This is what's amazing about it. I just click the opposite order, go back to that box, 228, hit OK, and now it's going to go the other way. Okay? So, find these ways that we can make things happen a bit quicker. Can we go through and offset each one of those? We sure can. But if I have to undo it and redo it again, maybe a little bit different offset, it's going to take more time. Okay? And then obviously with motion blur on here, motion blur that'll actually play. There we go. See, it's kind of going so slow. All right, whatever. Okay, no. Ignore the motion blur. Again, I'll look at that and see. Let me just throw these into a container. Keep everything organized, right? Always keep it organized. And then just another thing I want to show on this one, I'm going to delete all these. Do I want to? No, I don't want to. I'm actually going to go to, I scaled it. Alright, we'll just see if this works. Under one of your properties here, under layer I think it is, layer style, there it is. There is all the stuff from Photoshop. So you remember Photoshop has like drop shadow and outer glow and all these things? It has that in After Effects too. And what's cool is that if you actually had stuff in Photoshop that you had all these properties on, you can actually bring that into After Effects and it'll maintain all your drop shadows and whatever else. So if you drew something really cool in Photoshop and you're like, I want to animate this for my demo reel just to kind of show all the layers going into it, Photoshop or After Effects can accept all that stuff, which is awesome. So if I add drop shadow, which is a really cool effect to add onto here, you'll see that I get these like little bars on there. And what it does is it just creates depth between each one of these. So in this case, I actually could have the solid color going straight across. So if I went back and I'll show it again in 1 second. There we go. Get rid of these horrible colors. Actually, it's probably faster for me just to undo it. There we go. All right. So the drop, go up a little bit. So the drop shadow is under layer styles and drop shadow. This is one way to get to that. Okay, now I do not recommend just adding drop shadow to everything, because then what happens is you have that same exact setting on all of those things, and if you want to adjust it, you have to go to each one of those and adjust it. So what I do is I go to, let's say, the middle one, something down here, and I'll add that to it. So I go to layer styles, drop shadow. There it is. I can open up my layer styles drop shadow down here, and I can adjust the same settings that we would have in Photoshop. So I can adjust the distance. Where's my opacity is there? Spread. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, and then the distance. Like that. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So now that I have some settings that I like, now I can copy this drop shadow, grab all the other layers, and Control V and paste that drop shadow onto it. Okay? Now it might look ugly on some, like you're seeing some of these have a huge drop shadow and some of them don't. And that's just because of the layer order. So my layer that I picked was actually on the bottom, so you're not going to see it because it's going to be obscured by all the other layers. So you want to kind of test it out in some areas first before you go this far. Maybe I'll take the spread down to 20 and my size down to 5. And then I'll copy it again. I'll paste it all over the place. Okay, and I'm just doing Control C, Control V. I can also change my layer order so that that center one that happens, it happens at the top, and that way the other ones will happen in, it'll stack them different, so it'll look a little bit nicer. Okay, so when you get into stuff like this, then you're getting a little bit more advanced into how you're layering these things and how this order plays more of a role than just the order that things happen in. Okay, so then I can go back to this, go back to this, go back to sequence layers, hit OK, hit play. There we go. There's other stuff we could do too. We could add strokes to things, we could change colors. For now, just look at some basic designs and try to replicate those basic designs. The goal of this right now, remember today you're just doing some basic ones, right? Okay, keep them super basic. Try to create as many basic ones as you can. Animate one property if you're not comfortable doing 2 yet. Then animate 2 properties. Then try animating 3 properties. The idea is to get through these, as many of these as possible, as quickly as possible, to understand the workflow. Setting keyframes, easing, graph editor, offsetting stuff, that's going to be something we'll be doing every single assignment this entire semester. Okay? So, for the rest of class, play with this. Okay? Work on these fundamentals. Make 5, 10, 20 of these, however many you can get between now and the end of class.